We are live. It is 1:05 p.m. Central Standard Time, 7:05 BST, right? British Summer Time?
Yeah, it is now.
I can't remember. It's all you guys change it all the time. You got the cool. I love how in the United States it's just daylight savings, but we still call it Central Standard or Mountains. We don't change the name. You guys change the name because England, because the UK. And if you're paying attention to the stream, it is 11:06 Pacific Standard Time because we have the one, the only Juan Bagnell has decided to join us for our stream. It's been about a year, so we got him back in the chat. He decided to spend a couple moments with us. It was greatly appreciated. Juan, how are you, sir? Welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. We were kind of talking pre-show. Like, it's weird. It really has been like a year since we just got to chat digital screen face to face. So I'm glad to make sure we don't go too much longer. Like, we've got to shorten up that window on when we get to talk to, because I lurk. See, this is the weird thing about social media and podcasting and streaming is I lurk your show on Sundays. I try not to disrupt the chat. I know whenever my name shows up in the chat, people will react, and then you observe something and it changes the behavior of that thing.
Right.
So I almost always have you guys in my ear on Sunday when I'm kind of putzing around the house. And so I feel like we've been hanging out a lot more than we really have.
Right. Yeah, and we appreciate that. And we don't, and we honestly are glad when you decide just to listen, or if you show up and it's disruptive for maybe a few moments, but then the kind of conversation kind of gets back, and then you make you kind of jump in there. So and this is really the greatest show to just putz around the house, to listen to for an hour, and just while you're doing the dishes or maybe scrubbing a floor.
Can confirm I do lots of putzing.
Right, absolutely. So this is
I like to do that.
Ultimately putzable show full of putzes, not one. These two humans.
No. I resemble that comment. I feel like I'm in good company.
Right. Yeah. So we decided to have Juan on because it's been about a year, and again we always let everybody know that really Joe and I met in Juan's community, right? We were fans of the community, kind of started. I've probably been following Juan for it's been probably over 5, 6, 7 years now.
Yeah, it's been
kind of lost track. And then I started with the old show, the Across the Podcast, and then Matt went on to greater things, being a Twitch streamer, which is cool. He's doing really well with that. And then Joe and I I took a little hiatus, and Joe and I decided to pick it up where we left off and still have the 2-man interview format. So
yeah, for sure. I realized I was going through, I tried to do like a podcaster plug on the audio version of my podcast and realized like, oh man, I still have the audio clip of Sam and Matt. I still have Across the Podcast. You guys need to send me a clip so I can just put you in the ad block.
Absolutely. Yeah. We will do that. We got to maybe write it out this time because I think the Across the Podcast is just kind of like everything else with the show. We just winged it. And
I took your clip and I edited it down. So I took out the awkward transitions and stuff. So if you can give me a clean version of that I don't have to chew up.
We can make it happen. Yeah, we make it happen.
I might actually want to write
have faith in you guys.
Maybe that might be, might be cool. So we got to get that over to Juan so he can plug the show. And always, if anybody is in the chat who isn't paying attention, you clearly know where to go. Is the SGGQA podcast on Mondays. Unfortunately, it gets real busy for me around that time block. So usually if I am listening, I'm in a meeting and it's on and it's subtle. And I'm kind of like, oh, I don't need to talk for the next 20 minutes. Okay. A volume goes up and I'm paying attention and I'm trying to get into the chat. So
I kind of know, like, doing a podcast on Monday morning, people are actually trying to be productive. Like it's the start of the week. I have that same issue too, like this is the best time for me to host a podcast. I absolutely know it's sort of the worst time for other people to listen to a podcast, but it's the best version of the show that you'll get. If I wait until Friday, I am way too burnt. There's no way you're getting a solid show out of me on a Friday for a news, topical kind of conversation.
Oh, absolutely. And then, like I said, it's definitely a different kind of format than what we bring. Yours is definitely a lot more topical.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Deep dive and and one of those things where I read news articles and I really just as a cursory glance, check them out and kind of get the basics of what's going on. But then if I really know, I'm sure Juan's going to talk about this on the show, I will listen because then I can kind of get the commentary, the feedback from the community and kind of that conversation.
The whole like Q&A, the whole like chat interaction of doing that makes news so much easier. I mean, it's so much easier for me to stay on top of difficult news topics by making that the conversation with people live. Like if I were just trying to host and present, it would just be me reading off headlines. And you already have that. That's called Twitter. It's called social media. But it really, it's like we go through a part of the article, we try to figure out how this has been impacted, and that back and forth. It's like having a really good speech and debate club. Like, I have an opinion on something. Can I defend it? Okay, now can I refine it? Why do I feel the way I feel about something like that? And now I feel like I've come out the other side with a better understanding because I tried to explain it in the podcast, literally in real time. You're watching me figure this stuff out in
Juan's reactions
on the podcast.
Well, and so when you say that, it makes me wonder, is like, so in your lengthy career of doing that, have there ever been, when as you're trying to dissect and kind of get a handle of it and get on top of it, have you caught yourself midstream on some news stories? You're like, you're starting to like, wait a minute, it's on the change. Like I'm starting to, the table's starting to tilt the other way, and I either want to expound on that and talk about that, or maybe that for the future, like, hey, last week I was talking about this, and then I kind of sat on it, marinated, and I'm like, it changed a bit.
So I've always loved doing live. Like some of my favorite news bits were going live TV, because everything is a catastrophe until the camera's on, and then you need to make it look perfect.
Right.
So I've always loved that kind of tap dance. Often, I've been doing this so long now, my feelings are usually in the general direction. It's rare lately that I feel like I had a feeling about a story and boy, was I way off. Now I need to do my shock YouTuber thumbnail and my mind was changed and blown and number 3 will rock your world. Often now lately it's been, oh, my feelings on this were in the right direction, and I was way off the pulse for how bad this was going to be.
Right.
Like I was way off in the scale of how awful this story could turn out to be. And unfortunately, that's kind of, I think a lot of people are kind of feeling that. Like that's the trend a lot of our tech stories are taking right now. Like, oh, we thought this could be kind of bad. We didn't know how bad this was going to be, and that's sort of what's the sort of the surprise. But more than anything else, it's just sort of refining. That's what I really appreciate. It's, hey, I have an idea on this story, and I think that this is going to be important. We're talking through this story right now. This is a follow-up to something that happened 6 months ago. Maybe it's tech politics, or maybe it's just sort of a regulatory issue, or maybe it's like a new phone that's coming out. And then just by having that back and forth, and even with people who agree with me, sometimes with people who disagree with me, it really laser focuses. I had this feeling, but now I've worked through the story and I can much better conceptualize what I think the meat and potatoes of this is. And it's almost never the headline. The headline is almost always a distraction now. So if you're just going through your sort of casual news feed and you're just kind of skimming, well, like the first line of an article or something like that, I feel our media has done a remarkably good job of distracting us from what the longer term fallout or the more serious ramifications of these things can be. I mean, like we're watching politics just spin its wheels right now on TikTok, and everybody is vaguely upset with Congress. Like no one has their back, but everybody is upset with Congress for very different reasons.
Right. And realize that's pretty loaded, obviously, coming into the discussion.
For sure. Right. But again, if we talk through what really went down, like if you tried to sit through that C-SPAN, I had a group of guys on the Discord, and we watched almost all of it, and it was a chore. Man, that was not fun. Boy, howdy, our elected officials trying to grandstand for points with their constituents and make these ridiculous appeals to emotion free of reason or evidence. It was not a good committee hearing to try and get a handle on what the state of our political discourse is. But literally, like everyone who has an opinion on this, I mean, almost universally, even if you hate TikTok, like I'm not a fan of TikTok. I don't really like their business model. I think we need regulations in place to protect consumers against social media. Ain't gonna come from this. There's not gonna be any change from Congress.
And I would say TikTok. Probably in the last 10 or 15 years, most committee hearings when they do that, especially if it eschews to the tech or it's just always winds up being just this kind of like, you find out how really tone deaf and how to touch
How
politicians aren't generally, but
Yeah.
definitely with tech, they don't not only out of touch with the pulse of what their constituents are, but they don't even grasp the fundamental concepts about the tech even operates or even functions. And you can just clearly see them going up there and just trying to say things that are like, my 11-year-old niece probably knows more about how to use a phone, how a phone functions and works, than some of these people who are probably using said device on a daily, right? It's nuts.
And beyond that, so here's I'm actually going to spoil part of my Monday morning podcast because that's going to be one of the topics we talk about tomorrow. Here's my prediction. Corporations have too much power, especially data-centric corporations like Facebook and Amazon and Apple and Google. They way too much power, and they contribute way too much financially to politicians for them to ever really seriously get the regulations that they need. That's why I was a fan of Elizabeth Warren going out there and saying we should break these companies up because there are many conflicts of interest. So, tech companies have too much power. TikTok represents a unique threat to user privacy and security and especially like national infrastructure, but it's of a very similar threat that Facebook would pose. So we're going to see a bunch of politicians puffing out their chests. TikTok bad, China bad. But TikTok is operating within the letter of the law that has benefited every other tech company. So you can't really use our current slate of laws to punitively attack one company and ignore all of the transgressions of these other companies. So then Congress is going to say, well, we tried to do this and our constituents want us to go after TikTok. There's just nothing we can do. You know what we need to do? We need to reform the laws that protect these companies. And they're going to go after the Communications Decency Act. They're going to try and gut the protections in Section 230. And that's their wedge. They're going to do this whole, won't you please think of the children? Social media is dangerous for young minds. We need to go after these companies that harm them, like TikTok. Isn't TikTok bad? And then that's going to be the wedge that then the government can force other social media platforms to publish what the government wants.
Yeah.
Because that's the argument, is they want to gut the First Amendment right to not publish dissenting speech. Again, we have freedom of speech, but in the First Amendment, we also have an implied freedom from compelled speech. So the government can't force you to say something that you don't want to say. And part of that hinges on things like Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. So corporations have too much power. That's not going to change. TikTok is operating within sort of the regulatory guidelines of the United States. They're going to end run around those court protections. That's my prediction. That's what I think is going to happen from all of this fallout from the TikTok hearings.
Right, and that was the same thing. Speaking of compelled speech, that was kind of one of the major sticking points that Dr. Jordan Peterson was talking about with C16 in Canada. Right, is that they're compelling me to say this. Like I have to say this specific thing, as opposed to freedom of choice. But this compelled speech, not you can't. It's what you have to say in these situations by a government, and that's something that I think is dangerous, especially that should definitely get the. But again, it's all these plans about how they're going to approach TikTok. It's not just the TikTok. That's why I try to tell people it's not just that. They're not trying to attack that or ban it. There are way more other intertwined things at play.
All
that
of this
are
spider webs
moving
out.
that in. Yeah, it's all interconnected.
And for me, this is also why it's like we're all vaguely disappointed. We all vaguely have a sense of what kind of hypocrisy our government operates with when it comes to these types of tech topics. And it's also, you can point to other trends. Like if you really cared about helping people with these types of services and data and internet connections and stuff like that, well, shouldn't we have a fully functioning FCC? But conservatives are trying to prevent the appointment of the last chair of the FCC. Right. So how much do you really care about protecting consumers when we don't have a fully functional FCC? That's like our main weapon in the regulatory space to make sure that these things go down. It can't all go to the FTC, right? It's the Federal Communications Commission.
Right, not the Trade Commission. Right, exactly.
But we're going to sit there and grandstand, oh, but TikTok bad. Okay, well, you know, how we operate and how we utilize user data, that is a part of the function of the FCC. So shouldn't they be operating on all wheels? Oh, but we can't let a liberal appoint another chair to the FCC because that would be bad. So we're sitting here, like the big initiative at the FCC is another slap on the wrist for companies that engage in robocalls. But robocalling really hasn't gotten better. Spam text messages really hasn't gotten better. But we'll throw some more $1,000 fines at companies. That's gonna do it.
Yeah.
But we can't get to net neutrality. We can't get to broadband distribution. We can't go after companies that lie about their market penetration. We can't do anything because the FCC is currently deadlocked. So that's cool. I'm sure those politicians really care. They really care about protecting consumers. That's totally what this is all about.
Yeah, exactly. And to Michael's point, I agree. I mean, I think there's a little bit of hyperbole in all that kind of situation. I was just merely saying that it was, his point was compelled speech, and Juan's point was talking about compelled speech.
I'm not the biggest Peterson fan, but a broken clock was right once that day.
Right.
Like,
what do they say? A broken clock's right twice a day? That's what they always say.
I'll give them one. I feel government compelled speech is a First Amendment issue that we Americans should be hypersensitive about when politicians say private institutions must be forced to publish content that would harm their platform.
Right.
Because that works for corporations and that also works for people. The government should not be allowed to say you have to publish things that go against your own terms of service or your own relationship with your advertisers or your own relationship with your own readers.
Right.
That is a First Amendment issue. It's not freedom of speech because it's a private platform.
Right.
If we want a public platform, we need to fund NPR and C-SPAN and make a public social network.
Or like PBS, like spending PBS, right?
I want my tax dollars to go to something like that. It would be a dumpster fire. It would be a miserable mess. But then you would have a public place that can engage in that kind of freedom of speech, whatever that's going to look like, because people don't understand the First Amendment anyway. But that's the argument, is we're trying to say, well, but you need to make Twitter publish things that Twitter doesn't want to publish. That is a bad argument. That is very counter to what we've established as free speech protections in the United States.
Yeah, and they are still they still, if it's a private company, it is as much as, I mean, you don't have to play ball. Like I always tell people, it's like, well, Twitter this, I say, you don't have to have Twitter. Last time I checked, there is no constitutional requirement, or they're not telling you, hey, you must have a Twitter. I don't have Facebook. I don't want to play that game. I just don't.
Twitter's the one that makes me sad, because with every minor change following Musk's acquisition of Twitter, I've used it less. Now it's basically just a place for me to like advertise when new videos come out. I'm not on Twitter hanging out with people like I used to be. Right. But I think what needs to happen is refinement of Section 230. Because right now you've got corporations like Google. Google has an enormous number of subparts. One of those subparts is YouTube. Another subpart is advertising and sales. Another subpart is publishing. And they're utilizing Section 230 for one aspect of their business and then letting that be a protection for all aspects of their business. And that, I think, is a conflict of interest. They're saying we can't be held liable for what people post on our platform. That's what Section 230 protects you from, is from getting like sued and annihilated or destroyed by the federal government because someone said something naughty on your platform. Back in the old days, it was like if you were in a dangerous situation during a news broadcast and someone said a swear word, the news station was protected against those indecency laws because someone else said it during a live broadcast, within reason, of course. So they're trying to argue, well, we're not a publisher and we don't have editorial control, but we do have the ability to delist videos, block videos, silence videos. So we have the ability to edit the content, but we're not editors or publishers. And that shouldn't be allowed. That's having your cake and eating it too, right?
Clearly. And it doesn't take much to dissect that argument, right? I mean, you don't have to be like super into it and going, just on the face of it, it's wrong. Just hearing the words. You're like, no, that shouldn't be a thing.
One part of Google's business does deserve the protections of Section 230. Not all of Google deserves the protections of Section 230. So I'm sorry. We were pre-show and you were like, hey, you want to ramble about stuff. And I realized, like, man, I just took that directly into politics.
That's okay. And I'm just more worried about the fact that I didn't want to take a lot of the steam out of tomorrow's show if that was going to be something that really...
I'm happy to share any place that I can ramble and soapbox.
Well, speaking of being able to ramble, I see that the book has gotten a really good up, not just like a refresh, but like some seriously additional. I mean, this is like a DLC, man. It's like a DLC. It's awesome. I'm loving it, man.
It got really big. So, yeah, no, thank you for that. I wrote a book 7 years ago, but the thing that I really love about keeping it as an ebook, like it's never been published in a physical format, because I never really felt, again, me being me, I don't know that it ever needed to be a physical piece of paper. So take better photos, smartphone photography for noobs, also for nerds, but the title is for noobs.
Yeah, nerds as well.
Or you have NERBs, which would be a nerd noob.
NERBs. Yeah, that works.
Noobs.
Yeah.
So I try to do just light re-edits every year. But I was getting to the end of 2020 and looking into some of the changes that I wanted to write for 2021. And I held off just a bit because I kind of wanted to see what some of these rumors were coming out about things like 1-inch camera sensor phones and higher resolution image sensors and things like that. And I'm really glad I waited. So we went all of 2022 without an update, and I kind of poured all of those updates and what I was already planning for 2023 into the book. And it's the single biggest change to the book that I've done since originally publishing it. It started out as like a 200-page just beginner guide with some light focus on some of the tech, and now it's a 300-page monster where there are new chapters dealing with depth of field, of crop factor, and calculating equivalency for your focal length and for your aperture. And there's some really techie stuff in there now, while it still starts as like a beginner's guide just to basic composition and artistic merit. So I'm really excited about it because it kind of wraps up a whole bunch of stuff. Almost every single section of the book has been updated. Even I had some original comparisons in there where it was like, well, if you've got an iPhone 6 and you have a Galaxy S5, like trying to talk about stuff like that.
Maybe, I don't know. I mean, it's in there somewhere.
And I still have a few sections that are sort of older because people have older phones lying around.
Yeah.
But it was like I'm trying to demonstrate a difference in things like depth of field. That is absolutely not what the market looks like today. So it was time to scrap that old comparison point and bring in something a little bit more current, a little bit more modern. So I'm really excited, but because I feel like we've also gotten lazy in tech review land, focusing on a type of photography that does not improve with better tech. The point and shoot style photography that average consumers, most people do basic things with their phones, doesn't get better anymore. Right. If you've got a Galaxy S7 to a Pixel 6a, you're good. That's average consumer. You're fine. Mm-hmm. Your phone's taking great photos for those occasional snapshots and Instagram posts. Stop. You can get off the train.
You've won the internets. Yeah, I mean, it's.
But if you're looking at doing anything else, so and I'm literally talking about like someone pulls a phone out of their pocket, pushes the shutter button, and puts it back in their pocket. That's done. That's been done since the Galaxy S7. Literally taking the step to pull phone out of pocket, tap screen to focus on something specifically, push shutter button to take photo, and put phone back in your pocket. You're already operating your camera at a higher tier than most reviewers are talking about phones.
Right.
Like literally the care and consideration to focus on something specifically is already a step more advanced than most of the blind taste test, like, let's see what phone wins in this showdown of camera sample things. Like, that's all. Yeah. You're already done with the Pixel 6a. Just get a Pixel 6a and you're done. Right. And you're great. But if you care, even just the littlest bit, that's hopefully what my book can kind of help illustrate. Is there's ideas of photography that we learn from mirrorless cameras and DSLRs, and I shot on film when I was a kid, and if we bring those conversations to phones, magically our phone photos look flippin' incredible now. Right. And if you want to step up your idea, it's not talking about who has the bestest camera app. It's talking about composition and technique and the rules of photography and how to control light, just like we would with a standalone camera, but with a focus on what makes a phone unique.
Yeah, and like I said, I like about the book is if you're just looking to kind of just understand the basics and kind of get into just a kind of I guess would say a beginner level kind of understanding, you can. But then if you need to go deep dive and start digging into calculations and computational photography and focus and then rule of thirds and all those kinds of things,
for
right?
Sure.
You can kind of get there. It kind of it lets you engage that for a person's like, I'm going to go ahead and I'm good, man. I think I'm in a good place. I know how to do some post edits. This is kind of cool. And if you want to stop there, cool. But then you're like, I want to build my repertoire and kind of get it to where I can be a better photographer, not just a picture taker, right?
My favorite chapters in the book are dealing with things like, hey, if you were a fan of impressionistic painting, are there things you can do with phone cameras that can sort of invoke some of the sense of form that we get from blurry representations of classical art, right? I mean, like, just putting that idea in someone's brain and literally showing them you have a camera in your pocket that is capable of so much more. And you've had a camera in your pocket that is capable of so much more, and I'm saying this since like the Galaxy S7 or the LG G4.
Right.
You've been underutilizing your camera to this point since then.
Right.
And now the cameras that are in our phones are shockingly good. Like the evolution that we've seen into this 1-inch sensor is just one of the most profound steps that we've seen in camera evolution since I've started reviewing smartphones.
So I noticed you're back on the Moto. We were talking about that pre-show. So like, so what are your thoughts about, like, because you get the knock on the Moto is, and speaking kind of leveraging into the conversation was,
for sure,
it really can't perform like that. But then you're like, well, but if you're willing to do a little bit extra legwork, can you get those kinds of shots? Can you make that magic happen even on something that would be not a great computational phone, quote unquote, by everybody else's standards, right? In the hands of a capable person, can that phone's potential be maximized?
So I'm so happy with the setup for that there, Sam. The thing I love about this Moto is it perfectly defines for me how we try to treat all phones as the same thing for all low-level average users. A phone is a phone is a phone, and a phone does phone things. And if you want to do tablet things, you need to buy a tablet. And if you want to do laptop things, you need to buy a laptop. And if you want to do desktop things, you need to buy a desktop. The Moto still probably goes down as the worst premium tier camera of 2022. And it being the worst premium tier camera of 2022, it is still a fantastic camera where once you get a feel for it, it is tremendously easy to get good, fun photos and some casual video out of this phone. And I feel like that's the big misnomer. The Moto goes down in my books as one of the best productivity phones of 2022. And it would easily win my most improved award from just these most recent updates. I put my SIM card back in. We got another OTA. Moto doesn't do a lot of big OTAs. A lot of their updates come directly through Google Play app updates. So little components on Motos are updated directly. So you don't have to wait for an OTA to get an update for Ready 4. When your
I was going to ask about Ready 4. How's that developed?
So good. Oh, it's
Has it got good?
So it was great out of the box, but just like the little subtle refinement that we've seen has come from app updates. So there's a Ready for app on the phone that gets updated directly, and you don't have to wait for a big bloated OTA to get all of these little updates. They just constantly trickle through. So the Moto has been in this constant state of evolution as opposed to these big stair steps. Oh, we've got the new One UI, and now it's a totally refined phone, but there are these other bugs, so we'll see you next month to fix those other bugs. The Moto just constantly is being touched and refined, and the camera is one of those areas where it was almost unusable at launch, and then a couple weeks in, it got better, and now it is a perfectly functional shooter. It's just not focused on the same kind of content creation that we would expect from like a Vivo. But it goes down as one of the best productivity phones. So it is a great computer, and it's a good phone. You plug it in, you get Ready for it. It's got stylus support at a shockingly low price compared to something like a Galaxy Note. You know, it's just this amazing performance. And what's kind of surprising is even though it ran really hot at launch, because it was one of the first phones to have the 8 Gen 1, it's now one of the more better behaved 8 Gen 1s.
Yeah.
I've been running it now for a couple days back on 5G, and I'm getting like 9 hours of screen on time with moderate use.
Battery champs, man.
Wow.
But it doesn't have a 5,000 milliamp hour battery. So it's
Right.
outpacing a phone like the Note 22 by a significant margin. It's more powerful in a number of heavy workload tests like video editing and video rendering. It's faster than a Note 22, has stylus support like a Note 22.
Yeah.
It doesn't have as fancy of a screen. So the screen can't cycle down to a lower frame rate. It stops at 60. So the minimum refresh rate you get is 60 frames per second when you scale it down. So it should be using even more battery life there. And yet, over these updates, it's now one of the longer lived screen on time phones from that era. And I don't know what kind of magic sauce Moto is putting into it. It's genuinely one of the best computing devices of last year. Even for how we know that there are some definite drawbacks to some of that hardware, it's outpacing devices that should be more refined and should be better behaved. The Moto is winning those fights. So now, maybe I'm walking around with a really great camera phone like a Vivo, and I'm sending that stuff to my Moto, and I'm working on it with the Moto.
Well, and just as a kind of a step back from that, like as far as Ready for and Dex and all these kind of ways. I do you feel like that engagement has increased over the last 5 years? Has it kind of stagnated? And Mike, I didn't think so, and I'm glad you kind of nodded.
Yeah.
Mid drink wise, so I love the multitasking. It's very nice, it's very professional. But also, so my question for you is, if there were a couple of things, what do you think that companies could do or what do you think has to shift in the marketplace in consumer use to kind of start to maybe shift that to where it's usable? Like, I mean, I don't know if is there a magic pill? Is there market trends that have to happen and have to converge to make it all work at the same? I mean, I'm not sure what your thoughts are.
Unfortunately, I think there is a magic pill. The magic pill is you need to spend $1 billion a year on advertising. No one is going to use Ready for if they don't know about what Ready for is. And part of that problem is also Moto shot themselves in the foot with one of the stupidest names for one of the best features on one of their phones. Like, that's real dumb.
Right.
You could call it anything. You could call it computer mode.
Right.
And you would have consumers, oh yeah, I heard the Moto has computer mode. And you put up a billboard in one city and you take some photos of it on social media. And that would be way better than Ready for. Ready for takes so much explanation to describe what it is first before you can even get people into thinking about using it. But when it comes to desktop modes in general, because we've got Huawei, Honor, Motorola, and Samsung, I'm trying to think, like Asus has kind of like a gamer version of that. Red Magic has kind of a game console big screen mode for its alternate viewpoint. I think one of the big problems is in North America, we put those features on the most expensive phones, and then we're shocked that people who can afford really expensive phones already have a tablet and a laptop and a desktop. So their usage of Ready for is a novelty.
Right.
I feel we've lost the plot since the LG Velvet, because the LG Velvet was a mid-ranger phone that ran a great build of Screen Plus as its desktop mode. And so don't you think you'd get a lot more mileage out of a desktop mode if someone who is really considering every dime of their purchasing behavior got a good mid-ranger phone with very good mid-ranger performance, and then they didn't need to buy a cheap-ass Chromebook?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That changes the conversation dramatically.
Yeah.
And the only way we can engage on that now is to say, well, I guess you need to buy a 2-year-old premium phone and you don't get software updates, and isn't that a bummer? But then you could use Dex. Yeah. You're like, that doesn't really land the argument as well. So if you really want to change that usage, you've got to disrupt where it's most appropriate. I really feel most people who complain, like I'll pull up like a laptop dock, and those things are $300, and someone will invariably say, why don't you just buy a $300 Chromebook? And it's because a 4-year-old mid-ranger phone is more powerful than
Yep.
a $300 Chromebook.
Exactly.
So instead, I'll spend $300 on a simplified dock that lasts for multiple generations of phones and can be used with my camera, and can be used with my laptop, and can be used with my Steam Deck, and can be used with all of these other accessories as a portable display, and it will live far longer than a $300 Chromebook will be useful. That is a much better application of $300. And if I had gotten a phone like an LG Velvet, I'd be in for like, I don't know, what was that, like $900?
Yeah.
And I have a laptop and a computer and a phone, and it's one of the best featured, mid-ranger phones of its era, competing directly against the A70, only it had better performance, better features, had desktop mode and stylus support. Like, that was a great mid-ranger phone.
Yeah,
But we don't have those conversations until we can spend
no decks.
No decks.
Really?
Yep.
Really? You can't do it on this? Why not?
$1,000 MSRP, but that's also the tip of the spear. If that $1,000 flip starts selling and starts really making money for Samsung, it will be used as evidence that they can remove other features from their standalone phones. But see, Samsung has a vested interest in selling Chromebooks and laptops. Every other company has a vested interest in selling Chromebooks and laptops. You don't advertise that your laptop powerful phone is capable of displacing desktop or laptop use, because they want you to own 4 computers to do the task of what you really only need 2 computers to do.
Right.
And that's where we're always going to be stuck, is that kind of marketing and consumerism. I love my Pixel. I love my Pixel 7 Pro, hashtag Team Pixel, hashtag gift from Google, but it is a very good version of a phone that just does phone things. If I want to do anything else with it, you know what? I guess I got to get a tablet or a Chromebook or something else. But then I pick up this Moto, which right now I think the Moto's on sale again for like $450 on Amazon. Right. So it's in the ballpark of a Pixel 6a, but it's more powerful than a Pixel 7 Pro. I get this phone and I plug it into a monitor, and it could, easily satisfy all of the casual computing and a lot of the medium tier computing that I rely on a beefy workstation to achieve. And people don't know about it because Motorola isn't spending $1 billion a year marketing Moto phones in North America. There's just there's no return on that investment right now until they can see phones getting sold. The fact that you can buy a Moto Edge Plus for $450, we should all be terrified by, because that's the death spiral of LG.
Right.
We're only going to recommend you buy this phone when you get it at fire sale prices. Expect that Moto is not going to send premium tier phones to the United States anymore because they don't sell.
Well, and that's the problem, Juice, with all these other ones. You got to know the Vivos and the Oppos and all those, all these devices and all these Android phones, and they just aren't going to be available in the United States. And I don't really see anything changing if carrier engagement stays the same way. If all things are equal, I don't know how does Vivo and Oppo and these one break in? They don't.
So even Oppo in the UK, they're not putting their flagship ones out this year. They're only doing their foldables. They've totally changed their strategy.
All of the top tier phones are staying in China. We're getting the premium tier, but we're getting the sort of middle premium tier. We're not getting all of the pros, and we're not getting all of the ultras. And that is going to be a continuing trend because they know those phones are expensive to make, and they probably don't make as much money on them, even though premium tier devices charge more. You should expect a higher profit margin on them. But they know they can satisfy the local market. They'll sell like hotcakes in China. They can make a limited run on the manufacturing, sell out like crazy. They will be held up as status symbols on their home turf, where they're poor Android phones here. You have the wrong color text message, so you have a poor person Android phone no matter how much you spent on it. No one cares about a Galaxy. Like, that is not a status symbol here in the United States. Right. So why would you devalue your product, have it sit on store shelves, work so hard to get into the market? Right now you're facing regulatory pressure from China bad, because we're trying to block any Chinese company that's operating internationally here in the United States. There's no point. You have to suffer all that grief to sell a couple thousand units? That doesn't make any sense at all. Yeah. So all that tech is staying there, and we're going to be about 2 years behind on things like camera technology. Unless Sony decides to bring an option here we'll be 2 years behind the best camera tech that's currently available internationally. And we should be upset about that. We should not be saying,
It is very
oh,
sad.
but a note is almost just as good enough. I'll spend $1,200 on a note because it's almost the same, but it's not as good. Like, no, we should be saying, like, why can't we
200
get the
megapixels.
Right. Because that always makes it better. That's better.
Yeah.
And it's just disappointing. I mean, like I said, I was actually excited because I guess a lot of people remember is AT&T was almost having Huawei devices in carrier service. It was like within 2 weeks of actually happening, and then wham. Then
I have the Mate 10 Pro that was sent to me as a pre-release unit that was going to be the AT&T version. I have it on my shelf. It's a museum phone for me because it was an amazing phone, and that's when all the fallout happened with our government.
Excuse me. I know phones better than everybody. China.
Was that
China.
Trump era? I want to say the beginning of the fallout was, when did the Mate 10 Pro launch?
I thought it was like 2015, 2016 kind of time frame. I might be wrong, but
I'm going to have to look it up. I might be a year off. I want to say it was the tail end of the Obama administration. But
do you know what? That messed up a lot of the rollout of 5G as well, because a lot of the components were from Huawei.
Yep.
Yeah.
In the UK, they ripped loads of Huawei components out. It's just crazy.
Yeah. And then, like I said, it's one of those things where, and now with the current, climate when it comes to those devices, I think it's just going to be like Juan said. I think we're just kind of stuck. Who could less be happier than Samsung and Apple? They're like, oh, well,
yeah.
Thank God, because now they did all the legwork. This has been more effective at stymieing competition than anything an actual company could probably pull off. They're like, we couldn't pull this off if we wanted to, and
that means
they were probably behind it.
No.
I feel like there are conversations where these companies can lobby effectively and contribute, and it seems like Samsung is doing a better job of that through their semiconductor industry and their international presence and a lot of other components. But yeah, if we ever look at why hasn't the top tier Samsung Slate phone changed significantly since the last version of the Note? Since the S20 era, we've been refining, but the phones haven't changed in any significant fashion, and we're still acting like every year this is a revolutionary improvement to smartphone computing. But this year especially, nothing that makes the Note 23 better came from Samsung.
True.
Like the main reason why, if you were an international Samsung fan, that you would want to jump on this phone is because it's using a TSMC Qualcomm chip, not a Samsung Exynos chip.
And that's the only reason I got one.
That is a huge upgrade for international consumers. Here in the United States and in South Korea, on Samsung's own home turf, where they did not sell the Exynos either, it's kind of just business as usual. We've always gotten the best version of the Galaxy because we have the Qualcomm version of the Galaxy. So even though the Note 23 improves on the power, performance, and battery life of the Note 22, not because of Samsung. Samsung couldn't get that job done. So it's that kind of thing where we drop the ball on all of this messaging. Like, it really pissed me off that the Pixel was getting tagged for this new modem vulnerability.
Right.
You're like, oh no, Pixel owners, Google says disable VoLTE because you can be compromised. Yes, that was a security threat for Pixel owners. The headlines should have been, Samsung modem vulnerability is compromising millions and millions of Exynos-powered Galaxy devices and Pixels that use the Samsung modem. Think about how many couple millions of phones that Google sells, and then think about the hundreds of millions of phones with Exynos chips that Samsung has sold. The quality of the threat, the degree of the threat was, I don't know what, 10 million Pixel owners versus hundreds of millions of Galaxy A and Galaxy S owners internationally. Right. So if we're not putting that into perspective, But we're doing that because if you try to make Samsung owners upset, then your publication gets less clicks. Right. But you can make Samsung owners feel better because Pixels have this problem too. So it's okay. It's okay because it's not just Samsung. It's not a Samsung problem. I mean, Pixel owners, because Google should have fixed that.
Right, and then that's bad on you because then you went to the Pixel land, so then you have to take it. There's a little bit of a vulnerability. Then you have to. Then that's where you get.
Yeah.
If you would have stayed Samsung, you'd have been okay because you didn't have an Exynos domestically, and you didn't have that pesky Pixel problem.
Yep.
Ooh, pesky Pixel.
But again, it all just kind of bleeds in. It just all kind of bleeds into this sort of lopsided view because what really challenges, or I guess I should say what really monetizes is traffic. And you get the most traffic in North America confirming what people have already bought. And you know that 80% of the market is going to own an iPhone first, a Samsung second, and a Motorola third.
Right.
And so you have a steep sliding scale. Of the Android devices, you'll always say the Samsung is the best because it sells the most. So it's this faulty appeal to popularity. And then you can always say in an Android versus Apple showdown that the iPhone is the best because in North America, that's 50% of the market right there. Right. And you'll never really climb out of that because if you challenge that, you will make less money. Right. You will get less views, can confirm, because I don't really review Apple or Samsung that dramatically anymore. So, when I'm really trying to talk about competition, let me tell you, don't make a YouTube channel like mine. You will not make money on it.
and that just goes, I mean, I guess since you started, your, YouTube tech commentary journey, like where we are maybe 5 years ago to now, are we just now getting to the cusp of narratives being more toxic? Like it seems like every story now is just like it's this pendulum of Pixel sucks. And now Samsung did the moonshot, and is it getting worse? And if so, is there any kind of plateau and some rebound, or are we just going to kind of devolve into this tribalistic kind of?
Well, I mean,
until there's only one left, until there's one phone to rule the world.
I would say we've seen sort of stair steps down to the cellar. We've seen little steps down to the basement of deplority. I mean, I want to say like the trend started with Mac versus PC commercials. Because that started out fun and then it got kind of mean. And then Apple sort of walked it back. They realized that the PC character was actually getting a lot of sympathy in their ads. And so they stopped comparing their products to their competitors' products. That was a big turning point in Apple marketing. I feel for mobile, we really saw that ratchet with Samsung. Samsung kind of took the template of us versus them and tuned it to a really toxic degree. Samsung marketing set the tone of bullying first.
Right.
Because it wasn't just Samsung making fun of Apple. It was Samsung making fun of Apple employees in their commercials, and also making fun of Apple customers in their commercials.
Yeah, they were pretty aggressive about attack. I mean, it was a full-on assault.
Yeah. And so there's a certain type of consumer who really loves that kind of gamesmanship, and they suck because they take that and they say, it's okay to bully other people. Those people suck. I don't want anything to do with them in my comments. I'm actively muting anyone that starts picking fights. If you can't rationally discuss, because I pick on Samsung Knights a lot in my videos. I'm fine with Samsung fans because there's a lot to celebrate in a good Samsung device. But someone who is never going to rationally ever budge on attacking criticism of Samsung, or who will go to a video like, I've got a video out on the Motorola, I like the Motorola. And then I get Samsung fans going, but what about how it's not as good as the Galaxy? You didn't tell me that the Galaxy was better in your Motorola video. That person's just evaporated. I don't have the time or the patience to deal with anyone like that.
Right.
So I feel like that was another major transition point. But from there, I feel like what's accelerated in North America is the social conditioning of Apple services. So internationally, we don't see people struggle with this as much. But in North America specifically, we're so far behind on messaging. We're reliant on old technologies like SMS.
Right.
It was kind of like payments, right? Like across the world, they were like, wait a minute, you still swipe a credit card in North America? What is this, the dark ages? They had chip and pin, they had tap and pay, they had all these other things before Apple Pay really kind of took over. They were well ahead. I remember visiting Vancouver and being like, this is magical. Like, my card has this little symbol on it, and I can just sort of hover it over the key. I don't have to touch anything. This is amazing. And then
I was amazed the first time I saw it. I was like, "Whoa!"
It was years before we saw POS systems in the United States take over. So messaging is similarly built on this antiquated infrastructure of texting, SMS and MMS messaging. So if we're fans and we're enthusiasts of tech in general, the thing that's going to burn us is we are about to face a generational crisis of competition. Anyone under the age of 20, there is zero interest in premium Android. None. It does not statistically exist. For phones over $300, $400, Android is a non-starter. It is a no-go.
Right.
And we're about to usher this whole next generation of consumers into the marketplace where they'll be buying their own devices and subsidizing their own devices, and they're not going to care about things like right to repair and competition, and they're going to look at the color of the text message because that's what they've been trained to see, and their parents have taught them to do this because we're getting green bubble bullied by other parents at my school. Then there is no traction. We're already seeing the fallout from that happen. There is no OnePlus 11 Pro. We have a OnePlus 11. There is no Vivo 11, iQOO 11 Pro. That only exists in China. We're not getting a Moto Ultra in the United States. All of the top tier phones are starting to wither and fade because you're not going to make any money on them. And what's generationally cool is about to sledgehammer us in the face. And the thing that sucks is we've kind of rolled with it and we've kind of just accepted it and we've kind of pushed it as a narrative because so many people make money on this type of us versus them gamesmanship. But the market spoke and the market said, I don't want to be bullied by my peers and I don't want to be ostracized by my peers by having the wrong color text message. And that's what's going to motivate the vast majority of next generation consumers for buying their gadgets. So we're screwed. I really believe.
Well, I mean, that's
like,
what happened with my daughter.
She, years,
she was using my HTC. She was using my OnePlus 6. She was all Android, and then eventually she's like, "Dad, it's just too much. I can't. All my friends have iPhones, and it's just." They're not necessarily pressuring her, but it just was like it was this omnipresent kind of. She was the one using we've using a non-Apple device, and people kind of side-eyed her a little bit. And then
we've got two parents in our sort of parent group chats that will comment on every single green bubble that they see. Like literally every single. Oh, geez, there's another Android user in our group chat. And they're never saying like, oh, you should buy an iPhone. They never finish the statement, but we all know what the implication is.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's implied. It's like you should just like quit being a basic peasant, serf, human.
And the thing that sucks is they don't know that they actually have the worst messaging experience. Because Google Messages fixed emoji reactions on Android phones. I see the little thumbs up and thumbs down and smiley faces and hearts. It's the iPhone users in the mixed group chats that are getting the so-and-so liked a photo, so-and-so laughed at a photo. They're getting the text duplication reply.
Right.
I'm not getting it because Google can make a good messaging app that beats iMessage now in the modern era. So the iPhone users are complaining that their messaging experience has gotten worse, but they think it's Android's fault. And that's what Apple marketing has done such an amazing job of conditioning consumers that whenever something doesn't just work, it's a problem with the competitor. But really, this whole time, it's been Apple breaking standards, not supporting current standards, and then, oh, gee, I mean, if you were just only talking to iPhone users, then all this would just work. I guess Androids can't make something that just works. But it's always been an Apple problem, like Bluetooth file transfers. Why can't they just AirDrop? I guess you should only send files to iPhone users. Being able to connect a USB cable to a Mac and transfer files from an Android phone, Apple doesn't support MTP. It's not a problem with the Android phone. It's a problem that Mac is too stupid to use USB
right. And it's called a
properly.
protocol for a reason.
Yeah. So we're so far removed from like when Steve Jobs was at a Mac World in 1999, standing on stage next to I think it was a Power Mac, talking about this is how Apple is driving the adoption of standards like FireWire. Like Apple used to be the company that would usher in the next phase of whatever the standard was going to be, and it was a broad compatible standard across the entire tech landscape. Now Apple is the company that is increasingly trying to break the standard so they can sell you a more expensive proprietary solution, and then also wreck your ability to fix your gadget if there's ever a problem with it. So you just have to buy a new one.
Right. And I just find it funny how the juxtaposition was. That was always the knock when they were mad about PCs, right? That's okay, I gotta buy these proprietary this and an IBM cable and blah 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 blah. So people used to get all sideways and pissy about it, and then it's like Apple does it because they sell it in a slick kind of like all-inclusive. But yeah, I know where it's proprietary, but you're part of the good team. You're part of the good people. You're part of the smart ones who are, like who get it. You get it. Those Android people, they don't get it, right? They don't understand they don't understand. It's like it's a lifestyle. It's like,
but we're saying, we can talk about this and we can kind of appreciate, because I think a lot of people who are fans of technology, they assume that other people are just as rational as they are. Like Samsung fans don't understand how toxic Samsung Knights are. iPhone fans don't understand how vicious iPhone sheep are. They don't get it. Because they're using their, like, I don't have a problem when my Android buddy likes a photo and I get a duplicate. Yeah, it sucks, but whatever. And they shrug it off and they keep talking to their friend. So they're rational, but they don't get that the broad consumer trends are pushing this behavior in really toxic ways, like way worse than like Ford versus Chevy back in the day or sports team rivalries. It has now become this really insidious layer of consumerism to the point where there is no market data to suggest anyone under the age of 20 is ever going to buy an Android. Like if they really have the option to, and they're going to spend more, they're always going to spend more on an iPhone. If they default, then they know that they're going to be ostracized for having the Android in their group circle.
Do you know what? I think Samsung was part of the problem as well. Going back to what you said about Samsung bullying tactics. What they used to do, they'd obviously say, "Oh, you took the headphone jack away," and then they'd follow suit. It's so embarrassing. But they've done it time and time and time again. It's embarrassing for Android.
Box, memory card expansion,
and I didn't like the whole. I guess my thing with that is I didn't like the whole wall hugger ad campaign. I thought that was kind of a crappy thing to do. It's like, it's like you're just walking through. It's like, oh, look, and all these iPhone, like literally, they're like at the bulkhead, like tethered to it, like, oh, I can't move. It's like it's just, I just don't like those tactics.
I was a pretty aggressive. I mean, I would even maybe call myself a former Samsung Knight, especially up into the era around the Note 4. Like, man, Samsung could do no wrong. I was on board. These specious Apple lawsuits about IP theft, but Samsung was doing this all right. And I think for me, I stopped having fun with the marketing when they started making fun of Apple employees. So they had that one campaign where it was like this doofus Apple bro, and like he couldn't get anything right. And then it really turned when there was the Samsung campaign where they had the iPhone consumers who had shaved the notch into their hair. And you're like, you know what? That's actually not cool. That actually now, even for me, like I can't find anything to justify that. That is just toxic. That doesn't contribute to me liking Samsung products. It doesn't showcase anything that makes Samsung a better buy. It doesn't talk about features that consumers would care about. And literally every time that we've seen smartphone manufacturers invest a ton into marketing, the only thing that sticks is showing how your product deserves attention. Not how it's better than the competition, but what does your product do? When Samsung,
that's where Google got it right, I think.
So I completely agree. They're not putting iPhones in their commercials. They're not making fun of Galaxies in their commercials. They're talking about the color accuracy of your skin in the camera app. And
which is a big feature.
Right.
And they're also doing that with around $1 billion marketing campaign involving the NBA. So
Right.
it matters. If they had just spent a ton of money, like LG spent a ton of money to have Joseph Gordon-Levitt playing drums in a subway.
Right.
Does that tell you anything about their product?
Or the
young
Jason
people.
Statham going down with missiles flying around? It's like,
Yeah, exactly.
Or HTC having the Downey Jr. and the Gary
hipster
Oldham.
troll car
I was still
wash.
okay with the Gary Oldham because Gary Oldham.
Look, Gary Oldman's awesome.
But I was just like, yeah,
none of
it had
those
nothing to do with the phone. It was just like
told you anything about those things.
Mm-hmm.
The peak era for Samsung was the Galaxy S10. And the Galaxy S10, surprise, surprise, is the least iPhone-like Android phone that's maybe ever been built, aside from my personal favorites, phones like the LG G8 and the LG V60. But we're talking premier tier, right? The highest mind share, the biggest advertising, marketing campaigns, Galaxy S10. It had features on it. It had differences from the iPhone. And we should not be surprised that from the S10 to the S21, over 2 generations of Samsung phones, sales fell over 40% in Galaxy S land. And they've continued to fall. So to the point where Galaxy S now represents less than 10% of the total phones sold by Samsung. And the only Android phone that ever cracks the top 10 is like a Galaxy A13.
Right.
A13 sold a lot, yeah.
There is no interest in premium Android below the age of 30, really. But seriously, the next phase of consumers coming up, the next tier, the next generation, zero. So what benefit does a company have bringing $1,000 phone to the United States? Because no one's gonna buy it.
Right. Yeah, unless it folds. Maybe.
But even then, because the Galaxy Z series has not closed the gap on the loss of sales we've seen in Galaxy S.
Right.
So the promises of a more fragile tablet that turns into a double thick, awkward phone have not replaced Galaxy S10 sales.
Yeah.
Like, they've basically just helped supplement when we had an S and a Note. So we're kind of back to the number of phones that were sold when we had 2 different premium tier slate phones. That's about where we've kind of crawled back to. But that's still not enough to really move the needle on consumer awareness. And it becomes just that novelty of like, okay, so yeah, your phone folds, but what can you do with it? And we've sold consumers on, but your phone does basic phone things. And so if you do basic phone things on the big screen on a Z Fold, often you're not getting a better experience because apps aren't formatted for a 4:3 squarish, larger surface area display. Why would you want to multitask? I can't multitask on my iPhone and it does everything I want it to do just fine.
Yeah.
They're not going to care. You're not going to win that fight by trying to tell them that the productivity is cool because they're trained to think that phones just do basic phone things. Right. So the whole education of this has completely jumped the tracks, and we're not really selling the merit as much as we're selling the popularity. But Samsung can't win that fight. And that's what they're pouring a ton of their marketing into. And that's why the Samsung Nights, I think, have gotten especially vicious over the last couple years, because the marketing isn't true. And they kind of hinged their self-identity on being a part of this winning team, but it's not there anymore.
Yeah, they're not winning. Yeah, I will tell you though that with the Duo, I wish they really would have done a better job of marketing it. Clearly, obviously, same thing with Windows Phone, right? Microsoft just does not do their mobile space or their mobile stuff really well.
I still hold, Sam. I mean, I know we've had this conversation a bunch of times. I'm repeating myself here, and I think we maybe even had the same chat last time I was on.
Oh, I'm sure.
I really believe that, and I was happy to pay into it because I own both a Duo and a Duo 2 that I paid full MSRP for. For me, especially using the Duo 2, this was a platform for Microsoft to figure out mobile. They were building the best Surface that they could. It had nothing to do with making a better Android phone, but out of the Duo came incredible support for Android and Windows 11.
Right.
Out of the Duo came a much better understanding of ARM SoCs, performance for apps, and that's where we get the Surface Pro 9 SQ3. I feel like out of the Duo, Microsoft's premier hardware team learned so much more about how surfaces work on smaller screens. So I was here for it.
Yeah,
I
me
wanted
too.
the best Surface I could get, and I got it. And I still love my Duo and Duo 2. I think they're the best tablets I've ever used. They're not good phones, but they're the best tablets I've ever used. And so now from there, all of the improvements that Microsoft ushered in for making a better Surface are coming to Android 13.
Right.
So the whole way that Android 13 operates with tablets, we wouldn't have if it hadn't been for Microsoft, and of course for Samsung and DeX and software like that too. But Android as a better multitasking experience on a larger screen comes from Duo and Fold.
Well,
Short link to Windows as well, haven't you?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Like I said, nothing is more enjoyable to me than being in like at a coffee shop or being in public and pulling this thing out.
That's so good.
and just using it. Like I'm not even aware of it. I'm just kind of like, I'm getting
just for people that are not watching. He's got his Duo, not his thingy out.
Right, my thingy, my Duo.
He doesn't pull that out in cafes. No.
Skin by extremeskins.co.uk. Get you one. That's what it is.
Get yourself one. Skin your shit.
Skin your shit. I don't think they're going to use that. I kind of stepped into that tagline, and then I don't.
Best advertising campaign that will never get used.
Right. Guys, we can't use this like at all. They're like, oh yeah, no, we can't.
Yeah, cool guys, we love it. Keep talking about us.
Right.
We're not going to recognize you at all.
But what cracks me up is even with all the thing 855, no NFC, using this, and I mean, I have people that are just like, I'm sitting there just kind of getting ready to use it, and they're just people looking at me. I go, what? And they're like, what is that? And I said, it's a mobile computing device. It's like a phone, but it does like multitask. It's like, they're like, I mean, they think you're from 3021. They're like, what?
I was gonna say, Sam then says, I'm from the future.
Right. Yeah, and the funny thing is, Juan, it's always Apple users. Every single time. It's iPhone users going, that's a thing.
So,
like, does it make phone calls and stuff? They go, yeah, it takes pictures, makes phone calls. You can split side, fold it over. You can read books. You can tent it up and watch a little video. And they're like, what is that? What they are completely mesmerized.
None of them knew it existed.
Right. It's totally full. And then getting that, if you're a tech nerd, which we all are on the show, and
so nice.
That conversation, and my wife just goes, oh God.
Guy, he's doing it again.
It's like, please don't encourage him. You're not helping the situation I'm trying to do.
So I have a cousin who just graduated from college, and he is like diehard Apple kid. Like he's the kid who has to have an iPhone Pro just so he can watch Twitch.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like,
I didn't know that was
and
a
then
thing.
I make fun of him. I'm watching him like on his phone, and he's doing something, and like he can't leave this Twitch stream because there's going to be some kind of like contest or giveaway or something.
Right.
And he's asking other people around him to do other things on their phone so that he can just keep his Twitch stream up. And I'm making the joke like you can't do two things at the same time on your $1,200 iPhone Pro. But the only time I ever got that whoa reaction out of him was on the Duo.
Yeah.
And handing him the Duo and saying, yeah, it's like if you had an iPad mini that fits in your pocket and could also be used as a phone. And it was just like his world tilted 5 degrees.
Right.
He'd never, but then, and the iPad mini can do, and then that would be cool.
Like,
but then he said,
I could get down with that.
But then he said it has green bubble.
Right.
Well, yeah. So there's that. But it was also said with the sort of the foresight of, I'll totally buy something like that when Apple does it.
Yeah. Oh God.
And that's like, what we've really like 3 or 4 years removed
if
from
at all.
folding phones being a thing.
Yeah.
So the problem is like I would look at that and say like, I would probably be deeper in the Apple ecosystem if I could use an iPad mini as a phone. Why can't I use it as the primary phone number, connect an Apple Watch? I have my Apple Watch. Why can't I connect this to, you see all the dust that just kind of flew off of it? I don't use it that often.
It's kind of like the commercial with the purple, like,
exactly.
It's
great effect.
I get an LTE or 5G enabled iPad mini, connect it to this, connect my AirPods to it, use it as my primary phone. There are so many times I never interact with my phone to do things like take phone calls and check my messages. Why can't I do that? because Apple doesn't want to sell me an iPad that would displace a potential iPhone sale.
There you go.
And now Samsung is following a lot in that kind of, not quite the same consumer lock-in, but similar, so that these features won't work with other devices, and you need to kind of keep everything the same label.
Yeah, you don't want to cannibalize your own group. But I mean, here's the funny thing: if you're Apple, you're already to the point where I think that ball is now rolling. I think people would still buy the iPhone even if they had the iPad, just because it's so a thing now. It's almost become a conditioned response, right? They would just buy it anyway.
Absolutely.
So I think if you're Apple, I say, well, hell with it, just go for it. Because I mean, you're not gonna. I think Samsung and Google are very aware of cannibalizing their own market, right?
Yep.
I think Apple's like, these people will just buy whatever we sell them.
But I'd probably be on an iPhone Pro if it was running iPad OS, if it had a calculator on iPad OS,
because that's not a thing.
And if it could also have a USB-C, a fully functional USB 3 USB-C port, just like the iPad. I mean, I would have an incredibly difficult time not jumping on the iPhone train if that's what an iPhone could do. But that's something that we take for granted on mid-ranger Android phones. Like, that's the kind of compute functionality that's different that no company is advertising, because they don't want to scare off consumers from thinking that this stuff is too nerdy. So instead, they all just kind of end up in a downward spiral circle of trying to convince consumers that they're just as good as the iPhone at doing basic iPhone things. And that you're never going to win consumers over there, because why would you buy something that's just as good when you could buy the thing that really is the thing that they're all trying to copy?
Right. Well, we are at 1 hour and 11 minutes. It's been such a, I mean,
Sam, there's one thing I've got to do though. We had a fantastic segment last week, right? It was what's in Sam's drawer, and I want to ask, what's in Juan's drawer?
We're
what
talking
is in your drawer?
Drawer in your kitchen. We're talking in your
what
office.
Random stuff have you got in your drawer on?
Right.
Have you seen my bookshelves behind me?
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah.
Well, the funny thing is
this is what I love about it. It could be random. Anything random.
When I suggested this to Joe, I said, I think we would need a whole show just to get into first of all, a drawer, one, and then getting through said drawer probably would be an entire show.
Could be Juan's new Patreon video. What's in Juan's drawer?
Right.
I'd watch that.
I'd so watch that.
Hashtag unrated, hashtag gone sexual. Is that still a thing on YouTube? So literally the only drawer I can reach, because I've got my production drawers. So I've got like a drawer that's full of camera equipment. I've got a drawer that's full of like audio gear. I've got a drawer that's full of like chargers and stuff. I think the only thing that's in this drawer here are like old IKEA instructions, and I've got like baggies full of twist ties from products and stuff. So that's great. But I kind of just use my whole desk as a drawer. So if you guys want to be grossed out by what the life of a tech reviewer looks like, I'm going to start stacking. Oh, some of these are on. I should probably turn them off. And this isn't a brag. I actually have a big problem with getting rid of old devices. And I'm increasingly trying to find opportunities, because like some of these import phones I don't really want to give to charity. So there's one stack. I'll set those.
It's making a house like Lego.
Right.
And so here's some more. For all of the kind of long-term and follow-ups and things that I'm trying to examine, this is just what's on my desk. And I want to find better opportunities to like recycle and kind of make sure that these just don't end up in landfills. So there's a second stack. And then we'll do a stack of earbuds. So we'll keep going here.
You're gonna run out of hand space very quickly with the earbuds. Yep. They're not exactly compact.
And I got to be real careful too, because the phones are all now starting to slide, because I stacked them and all the camera sensors are going. So they're I just dropped. Oh no, those were expensive. And then so two more right here. Oh, and Pixel Buds. I got to make sure hashtag Team Pixel, hashtag gift from Google.
Absolutely.
So all of those will go in another pile. We could do headphones. I've got smartwatches.
I like microcrockery. He says one has a drawer of drawers, cloths. Just a drawer full of drawers.
Yeah, you've got to have that. You've got to have microfiber cloth.
Absolutely.
Of course.
Solid state drives for projects that I'm working on. Is that
what ones are they?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
Oh, which ones? I'm mostly using the SanDisks. So the ones
Yeah,
like
good
SanDisks,
choice. Good choice. They're solid.
DAX. So I've got a couple DAX and my Griffin that actually made it off the desk for a second. So I've got USB and here's a FIO.
That's a big DAC you got there, sir.
I know.
Here's another FIO.
That's legit DAC.
And another FIO. So I've got 4.
Right.
So yeah, the desk is sort of the drawer. It's sort
and
of
the
the
detail
catch-all.
just wants to make sure that you have a good fire suppression or extinguishing system.
Yeah,
it's a good
it's
question.
over by the bookshelf.
Okay.
No, I can go grab it if we need to.
No, that's okay. We just want to make sure a DT is always thinking about the practical, and he wants to make sure you're safe. We don't want to.
So that is, I mean, joking aside, I kind of started out my career, and I had this love of. I've had a love of mobile since like the 4th grade, and I was playing with like my parents' scientific and graphing calculators. Like, I was the kid in the 5th grade who went and got one of those TI Texas Instruments pocket organizers. So it's just a fancy Rolodex, but it had a full QWERTY keyboard, and I would write little notes in my classes on it and stuff, like thumb tic-tac typing on this spongy, rubbery keyboard. I went through PDAs. I was early into smartphones. I really love this stuff, and I've got a collection that I feel are personal museum pieces for me. But in being a reviewer, I mean, getting my hands on stuff. And sometimes these companies are really great about taking it back. And sometimes they're just like, oh, no, you should keep it and keep playing with it. And you're like, I don't know what I'm going to do with a 2-year-old Poco here in the USA. I can't really give that away, because if I donate it to a shelter, and heaven forbid, like say I take it to like a women's shelter, and they're trying to get disadvantaged people phones, and it doesn't work with AT&T bands. And you're like, you're screwed, right? You know, like, I'm going through this like hyper liberal guilt of how do I handle this where it's not just e-waste and I'm just taking it to a demolishing recycling center or something like that. Right. So it is kind of a problem. I highly recommend don't fall into the trap that I've fallen into. If you have any interest in not just technology but reviewing, find a better method of cycling through this stuff more efficiently, because I've got a full bookshelf of old devices, and one shelf is all Samsung. So that's scary. Old Samsung batteries are terrifying.
Yeah. It's like they're like ticking
time bomb.
It's like walking the beach and find like an old World War II like landmine. You're like,
right.
I'm gonna go ahead and go to the other side of the beach. Thank you very much.
Like 20 years from now, it's gonna be like, I was going through my dad's old drawer of things, and I found this weird note, and the battery on the note is all like puffy. What do you think I should do with it, guys? And you're like, that's a Note 7. Run!
Yeah.
Just set it down slowly, back away slowly. Don't make any sudden moves. No love.
Yeah, that's so Note 7 was when we were still we were at Pocket Now. We were still sort of on Can I swear? Is that okay?
Yeah, swear away.
So we were still on Samsung's shit list, and their PR was just miserable. So we did finally get a Note 7 to review just when they started doing the recalls. And I almost felt like that was punitive, but they wouldn't send us the return kit. So if you remember, like MKBHD got this like fancy box with gloves and a special container, and he could send the phone back to Samsung was like, nah, you can just keep it. It was almost like Samsung PR was like, we hope you die in a fire.
Right, we hope it doesn't burn your whole damn studio down, because we don't like you pocking out jerk faces anyway. So if it can go ahead and burn your shit down, that's cool. We're good with that.
Yeah, we're as Samsung, we're kind of fine with that. We can handle the liability.
Absolutely. Well, Juan, as always, we really appreciate. We know that your work is always ongoing. That you're always in the middle of a bunch of stuff.
We saw that, Joe.
And then just for you, it's got a removable battery. Just saying, it does.
It has. Look.
Look at see, that's brilliant. I love it.
Absolutely.
All the features we've lost on our fancy phones.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. I asked him, I said, does it have the little voice that it makes because he's got buttons, does it have a British accent? Do toys in the UK all have British accents? I'd assume they do.
I'm saving that for next week because I need to change the battery.
I'm going to change the battery. So, again,
Joe, whenever I can, if I have an option to, I almost always set my voice replies and voice interactions to UK English.
There you go.
Because then it's like I've got a fancy butler for
He has his own Jeeps. He really has a Jeeps.
Yeah.
Yeah, you wouldn't want it in my voice, though. Definitely not.
I just still like when Rob Williams did the bit where he has the GPS, but it's like an old Scottish guy. Turn right. You missed the fucking turn. Right. Yeah, he goes, I would totally be down for that. It's like where he just hassles you the whole time. Like, you missed the turn, you wee beastie. It's back there. And you're like, oh, okay.
I mean, I know we're trying to wrap this up, and I'm keeping you long.
No,
but as old guys, don't you miss sort of like the crazy days of TomTom navigators having like voice packs, like Yoda can give you turn-by-turn instructions to your destination.
Right.
I miss
yeah, Yoda's the one.
Fun.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Especially if it's just like, turn you missed, you did.
It's when you have Chewbacca that you get really confused.
Right.
Yeah. I had John Cleese.
Oh, nice.
Buried in the John Cleese TomTom voice actions, you could get it. I forget how you got there, but you could get it to say, and yes, this really is John Cleese. I'm doing this because I needed the money.
Right.
Legend.
It was like buried and there was like a little Easter egg.
Definitely.
What a legend.
Like little like the Andrew Dice Clay, little boy blue, needed the money. Yeah, kind of thing. Yeah. And then one last nugget, I think Juan would be proud of me. Last night, I don't know why I did, but I got on a plasmatics kick last night.
Oh, hey.
Oh, yeah. I was just like, and I was like, monkey suit? I go, and that was it. And then it was just like Wendy Williams, and I went into this like 2-hour
Yeah, you just got it.
spiral
it's deep dive time.
it was great. I was just like, I thought I did this, and I was thinking it's funny. I didn't do this specifically because I was going to be talking to Juan tomorrow, but I definitely want to make sure that I mentioned the fact that I had monkey suit on.
I mean, now I might be up late tonight once everyone else has gone to bed, so I can break out the real nice open back headphones and just jam for a bit. So that might be a thing.
Yeah, it's mad plasmatics. I'm just saying it. It just gets you right. So anyway, Juan, thank you so much for coming on the show and taking time out of your busy schedule. And of course, we, like I said earlier, to your point, we'd like to maybe close this gap on having you on.
Oh, definitely.
As your schedule permits, obviously.
And also, just I feel if you have me on more than once a year, I won't have such a backlog of political ire.
Right. It's like, I've got to get it out. It's got to go.
We love it, Juan. Don't worry. We love it.
Talk about like pizza for an hour or something like that instead.
Oh, and by the way, St. Louis FC.
Yeah.
5-0, second clean sheet again.
Hey.
Tell you, man, it's a thing, man. St. Louis FC is kicking butt and taking names in the Western Conference area.
Gonna dominate.
Until we friendly against Chelsea.
Someone good.
They lose like 10-0. It's like, oh shit. Okay, never mind. So, anyways, that's the show for today. For myself, for Joe, for Juan Carlos Bagnell. Thank you so much for showing up. Stay hydrated. Enjoy your tech. Be excellent to each other. And we will catch everyone on the next one. Next week, I think we have Gigi. We have Rachel coming on the show.
Rachel and Reggie. It's going to be a great show.
Rachel and Reggie. And I'm going to be Randy. Oh,
Randy,
did I just say that?
Randy. I love it. Randy, Rachel, and Reggie.
Right. It'll be awesome. And so tune in for that. Hopefully not terrible, awful. Last time I had Rachel on, it did not go at all well. So hopefully I can come back from that. And,
I feel you will redeem yourself. I have faith in you.
I hope so.
I have, yep. Every faith in you.
So that's the Nomad Tech Project for Sunday, March 26, 2023. Again, we'll be back next Sunday. Take care, everybody. We love you. See you on the next one.
Peace. Goodbye.